Hello, how's it going? I'm going to do a video essay on Persepolis. This is a graphic novel published in 2000 by Marjane Satrapi. Marjane Satrapi is an Iranian author. She grew up in Iran during the Islamic Revolution. She lived pre-war and post-war. She lived through the change of regimes, and she also lived through the Iran-Iraq war. Then, when she was a little bit older, she moved to Austria, Vienna, so she could have a better life. Now, this book explores how politics and political regimes can influence so much the individual down to a personal and emotional level. And also, since it's a graphic novel, it has visual items. It makes it more accessible and easier to understand. This book, it's very concise, it's a very easy read, and it is so deep, even though it's easy to understand. This book is a masterpiece. I recommend you should read it, so please stick around for this video essay. So the book begins in Marjane living around this time in Iran, where women were more free than they were after the revolution. Women could read, women could write, women could go to school, and women could wear whatever they wanted to wear. The era for women before the Islamic Revolution was way better and was way freer. But then a group of Islamic extremists, around with some communists, overthrew the old government. The old government was backed by Western powers, which is why a lot of people who were extremely faithful to the Muslim faith were against it. And the book talks about all this on a personal level. So it talks about Marjane right here. So she's a little kid and she's living through this revolution. She has to put a veil when she's a kid. Now this impacts her immensely because she loved to wear her own clothes. And if she's a kid, she didn't even know what the veil was for. Now, Marjane's parents were against this revolution. You can see right here, they were going to protest this regime. Now, of course, with this upbringing, they upholded the Western values, and these values were passed on to Marjane. Marjane was against the revolution even as a kid. Marjane was having a lot of difficulties to lose her Western values, which were being repressed. So her parents, because of her loneliness and because of all the terrible conditions she had to go through in Iran, they sent her to Austria to a French school. Then Marjane struggles to adapt and to fit in. Marjane gets into drugs, and then she ends up on the streets of the city she went to. So Marjane came back, but the conditions were unbearable. Even back in Iran, her home country, the conditions were terrible. So then Marjane decides to go back to Europe and stay there for good. Marjane's character does change through Persepolis because she grows older, she becomes more mature, and she becomes more experienced. But there's something that does not leave Marjane from the beginning to the end of the novel. Marjane is always intelligent, rebellious, and above all, very politically aware. It's important to know that part of the reason why Margie was so rebellious is because she was always exiled from the center of society. Margie only goes to drugs in this part of the book because she is completely ignored by society. Margie has no group, and the people that she walks with are people who use drugs. This is the way she found to fit in. A group of people who were exiled and ignored by society that helped her fit in. Although these people had terrible habits, she ended up adopting these habits because those are the people whom she walked with. Now, Marjane's parents sent her to Austria because they wanted the best of her. Their education was for her to be a free woman. They've always emphasized the importance of studying. So her parents were, of course, more of a Western ideology. They were Muslim, but with a Western ideology, and their most significant intent was to send her to outside, was to send her to Europe, so she could live a freer life. Although Europe wasn't all marvelous how they expected it to be, she went through extreme hardship, but she was technically freer, according to the law. So overall, I believe they were a good influence on her, and they made her a very free woman. And also a woman that fights for her own rights. Now, Uncle Anush, he used to be a communist. Now, he was, of course, exiled. He went to prison. He was persecuted in Iran for being communist. Now, his communist ideals had an extreme influence on Margie. Now, I did say that she had communistic ideals, but then they were mixed with Western ideals in the beginning. And in the beginning, she even saw God as a figure of Karl Marx. So she was very affected by Uncle Anush's communism. But his communism, to her, wasn't the political ideology itself. It was more of the revolutionary idea of communism, of the rebellious part of communism. This is what attracted Margie. So Uncle Anush definitely had a crucial part in molding Margie to a rebellious character and a revolutionary character. In the beginning of the book, the fundamentalists are the main antagonists, but this quickly changes when she moves to Europe because, well, the fundamentalists, they don't own Europe, they can't do anything in Europe. Now, there is no main central figure of antagonism like the fundamentalists in Iran, but there is more a collective antagonist of the people excluding Marjane. It's not one person, but many people exclude Marjane. A lot of people don't try to help, and a lot of people bully her because she is Iranian. And this is one of the most prominent themes in Persepolis: social exclusion and alienation. This is just an example of how Muslim women suffer from being exiled from society. Persecution does not need to be targeted and attacked. Persecution can sometimes be just ignoring the person. In this case, Marjane is being persecuted, not directly, but she's being ignored, and that's a form of persecution. Another form, of course, of theme in the book is the state controlling her body. The freedom versus oppression, and she fights for freedom. This is another prominent theme in the book. Freedom versus oppression. The role of women is another theme in the book because before they had a role which wasn't really defined. Women could read, women could write, women could study, but then they couldn't. So gender roles is also an extremely important theme in Persepolis. The effects of war on the childhood of people is also a prominent example of a theme. The effects of war on people, because Marjane, the things she sees, the things she notices from war, the deaths of people she loved, this affects her, this traumatizes her, creates generational trauma. Now, Persepolis has also an immense amount of stylistic features. I will list 5 features here. Now, the most cliche, the most used, the most prominent feature is the veil. The veil symbolizes oppression, and it symbolizes lack of freedom, and it symbolizes that women aren't free. So the veil can always be used in your paper too. It can connect to a bunch of different themes, mostly related to women and related to oppression. Oh, and this is in page 3, by the way. Another stylistic feature that is always employed is the facial expressions. Marjane is a kid. She shows a lot what she feels. And even as she gets old, the eyes don't lie. You can always check for Marjane's facial expressions to use as a feature to show what she is feeling. In this case, her facial expression represents the fear she's feeling because all of her friends were leaving Iran. So she felt unsafe, and she also felt a little bit of missing her friends. Part of also the reason why she had this facial expression is because all of her friends were leaving Iran, and they, of course, if everyone was leaving, she felt unsafe, and she also missed her friends. So she's a kid, and analyzing her facial expression can be very important into reaching the goal of describing the global issue, because the global issue can sometimes be the suffering of the individual. So using her facial expressions can really help analyze the suffering of the individual in these contexts, as it is shown, for example, here in page 64. Another tactic that's employed is the use of secondary languages. So, for example, German, when her roommate says, "Hallo, ich bin da," which means "hello, I am here." This is just to make the reader feel what Marjane feels, the non-understanding of the language, and makes the reader feel alienated just like Marjane feels. And this is shown a lot in page 161. But by far the most used feature is a speech bubble. Speech bubbles are used in different ways. So for example, here it has little points, and these little points, these sharp edges, are to show that the person is screaming. So the landlord is screaming at Marjane for not paying rent. So Marjane is in a very difficult situation, and this just shows how Marjane is in such a bad place that she is losing the life she lived in. So always look for speech bubbles. They can always help you make different analysis. Body language is very important to look for. It's perfectly shown in page 17. The father doesn't want her to go to a protest, so he puts his hand on his face, showing fear and sadness because he does not want her to go to a protest. She's a kid. So always look for body language. This is a graphic novel, so there's always significant body language that can help build an analysis. And of course, the implications of this feature is to show that how parents also are afraid of what is going to happen to their children in these types of environments, in these authoritarian contexts, in these oppressive contexts. And the themes present in Persepolis are also present in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, such as oppression, gender roles, control of women, and of course the exilation of certain peoples, which is the people that aren't able to serve the society. So for example, the women who cannot bear children. Thank you for watching, and read Persepolis.